NewsRadio. The episode opens with WNYX descending into an oddly specific form of chaos when a seemingly minor scheduling mistake snowballs into a full-blown identity crisis for the station, as Dave Nelson discovers that two major segments have been accidentally booked into the same time slot. One a serious investigative news report and the other a bizarre, highly theatrical special segment Catherine has been planning for weeks. And what initially appears to be a logistical issue quickly evolves into a philosophical battle over what the station actually represents, with Dave insisting that journalistic integrity must take priority while Catherine argues that entertainment is just as essential to keeping listeners engaged, and this clash sets the tone for an episode that constantly blurs the line between substance and spectacle, forcing each character to confront their own beliefs about the purpose of their work. Lisa immediately sides with Dave on the importance of maintaining credibility, but also recognizes the potential fallout of canceling Catherine's segments, especially given how unpredictable Catherine can be when she feels creatively stifled. Joe treats the entire situation as yet another example of management incompetence and refuses to get involved unless it directly affects the technical side of things. Bill seizes the opportunity to position himself as the guardian of true journalism, dramatically advocating for the investigative report while simultaneously exaggerating its importance to inflate his own role in the station. And Matthew, caught in the middle as always, tries to juggle conflicting instructions from everyone, leading to a series of increasingly frantic attempts to keep both segments alive without fully understanding the implications. As Dave attempts to resolve the conflict, he becomes increasingly rigid in his insistence on choosing one segment over the other, framing the decision as a matter of principle rather than practicality. But this approach only deepens the divide within the team, particularly as Catherine begins to push back more aggressively, arguing that the station's identity has always been rooted in its unpredictability and that sacrificing creativity for the sake of appearing serious would undermine what makes WNYX unique, and this tension is further amplified by Jimmy James, who takes a strangely neutral stance while offering cryptic observations about the nature of media consumption, suggesting that audiences are drawn not to consistency but to contrast, a perspective that complicates Dave's attempt to impose a clear hierarchy of value between the two segments. Meanwhile, the technical complications of running both segments simultaneously begin to surface as Joe reluctantly acknowledges that it might be possible to merge elements of each broadcast, though he warns that doing so would create an unpredictable and potentially disastrous result, which of course only makes the idea more appealing to Catherine, who sees it as an opportunity to experiment with a new form of storytelling that blends news and performance, while Dave views it as a reckless gamble that could damage the station's credibility beyond repair. As the episode progresses, the debate shifts from a practical scheduling issue to a deeper exploration of how each character defines their role within the station, with Lisa questioning whether professionalism necessarily means suppressing individuality, Bill doubling down on his self-appointed role as a serious journalist while subtly revealing his own need for recognition, Joe grappling with the tension between technical precision and creative chaos, Catherine embracing the idea that performance and authenticity can coexist in unexpected ways, and Matthew struggling to reconcile his desire to help with his fear of making the wrong choice, all of which culminates in a decision to attempt the risky hybrid broadcast despite Dave's reservations. The execution of this plan becomes the episode's central set piece as the station launches into a live segment that oscillates wildly between hard-hitting investigative reporting and Catherine's theatrical narration, creating a disorienting but oddly compelling experience for listeners, with Bill attempting to maintain a serious tone while being repeatedly interrupted or reframed by Catherine's dramatic interjections, Joe frantically managing the technical aspects to prevent the entire broadcast from collapsing, Matthew running back and forth to relay information and keep things moving, and Dave watching the chaos unfold with a growing realization that his initial instinct to control the situation may have been misguided. As the broadcast continues, something unexpected happens. The contrast between the two segments begins to create a unique dynamic that draws listeners in rather than pushing them away, blending information and entertainment in a way that feels both unconventional and strangely effective. And this outcome forces Dave to confront the possibility that the station's strength lies not in choosing between opposing approaches, but in finding ways to integrate them. A realization that is both liberating and unsettling because it challenges his traditional understanding of leadership and decision-making. The aftermath of the broadcast is marked by a mixture of relief, confusion, and cautious optimism as the team reflects on what they have just accomplished, with Catherine celebrating the creative success of the experiment, Bill attempting to claim credit for maintaining the integrity of the report despite the interruptions, Joe acknowledging that the technical execution was more successful than he expected, Lisa recognizing the potential value of embracing unconventional approaches while still maintaining a level of professionalism, and Matthew feeling a sense of accomplishment for having contributed to something that, against all odds, actually worked. Dave, in particular, undergoes a subtle but significant shift in perspective as he acknowledges that his role is not to eliminate chaos, but to guide it in a way that allows the station to evolve, and this realization is reinforced in a final conversation with Jimmy, who points out that the most memorable moments in media often come from situations where control is relinquished rather than enforced, a statement that resonates with Dave as he reflects on the day's events. The episode closes with the station returning to its usual rhythm, but with a newfound sense of possibility lingering in the air, as the characters carry forward the lessons they have learned without fully abandoning their established dynamics, maintaining the delicate balance between order and chaos that defines WNYX, and in doing so, the story encapsulates the essence of the series, blending sharp humor with thoughtful exploration of identity, creativity, and the challenges of navigating a workplace where unpredictability is both a constant obstacle and a source of strength, ultimately delivering an episode that feels both chaotic and cohesive, much like the world it portrays, and leaving the audience with the sense that while the station may never fully resolve its internal contradictions, it is precisely those contradictions that make it work. And as the station settles into the aftermath of that chaotic hybrid broadcast, the ripple effects begin to show in subtle but meaningful ways that push the episode beyond just a one-off experiment and into something that feels like a quiet turning point for how everyone at WNYX understands their work. Because while the immediate reaction is a mix of relief and disbelief that the whole thing didn't crash and burn, the longer they sit with it, the more they realize that what they pulled off wasn't just luck, but a strange kind of accidental innovation. And Dave in particular can't stop replaying the broadcast in his head, not from a place of anxiety this time, but from a genuine attempt to understand why something that should have failed so spectacularly ended up working, which leads him into a series of conversations with each member of the team where he tries to piece together the logic behind the chaos, only to discover that there is no single explanation, just a collection of instincts, reactions, and improvisations that somehow aligned in the moment. Lisa approaches the situation with a more analytical mindset, attempting to break down what elements of the hybrid format were effective and whether they can be replicated in a more controlled way. But she quickly runs into the paradox that the success of the broadcast may have depended on the very lack of control she is trying to impose, forcing her to reconsider her usual reliance on structure and planning. And while she doesn't fully abandon that mindset, she becomes more open to the idea that flexibility can be just as valuable as precision, especially in an environment as unpredictable as WNYX. Joe, on the other hand, treats the outcome as a technical anomaly that he both respects and distrusts, acknowledging that the system held together under pressure in ways he didn't expect, but also warning that relying on that kind of improvisation is risky at best, and yet even he can't deny a certain satisfaction in having pulled it off, which shows up in the way he becomes slightly more willing to entertain unconventional ideas in future discussions, even if he continues to frame his involvement in purely mechanical terms to avoid engaging with the more abstract implications. Bill, unsurprisingly, rewrites the entire narrative to position himself at the center of the success, claiming that his unwavering commitment to serious journalism provided the necessary foundation for the experiment to work. But beneath that self-aggrandizing version of events, there are moments where he seems almost genuinely impressed by how the combination of formats elevated his own reporting, giving it a new kind of energy that he didn't anticipate. Though he would never openly admit that Catherine's theatrical interruptions played a role in that. Catherine herself embraces the experience as validation of her long-held belief that storytelling doesn't need to fit into rigid categories, and she becomes even more playful in how she approaches her segments, experimenting with tone and structure in ways that blur the boundaries between performance and information. But there is also a quieter layer to her reaction, a sense that she is starting to understand the impact of her choices on the rest of the team and the station as a whole, which adds a bit more intention to her otherwise spontaneous style. Matthew, who spent most of the broadcast running around trying to keep everything from falling apart, comes away from the experience with a surprising boost of confidence, realizing that even in the middle of total chaos, he was able to contribute in a meaningful way. And this realization subtly shifts how he sees himself within the group, making him slightly less hesitant and a bit more proactive in the scenes that follow. As these individual reactions play out, Dave begins to synthesize what he has learned into a new, more nuanced approach to leadership, one that doesn't try to eliminate unpredictability, but instead looks for ways to harness it without letting it spiral out of control. And this evolution is reflected in how he handles the next minor crisis that inevitably arises at the station, choosing not to clamp down on it immediately, but to observe how the team responds before stepping in, a decision that feels risky but ultimately pays off by allowing a more organic solution to emerge. Jimmy James, watching all of this unfold with his usual mix of detachment and curiosity, offers one final piece of cryptic insight that ties the episode together, suggesting that the most valuable outcomes often come from situations where no one is entirely comfortable, because discomfort forces people to adapt in ways they wouldn't otherwise consider. A statement that resonates with Dave as he looks around the newsroom and sees a team that is still chaotic, still argumentative, still far from perfect, but also more dynamic and interconnected than before. The episode closes on a note that feels both familiar and slightly altered, with the staff returning to their rhythm of banter and dysfunction, yet carrying forward the subtle changes in perspective that the experience has sparked. And Dave, standing at the center of it all, no longer seems quite as desperate to impose order on every situation, instead embracing the messy, unpredictable nature of WNYX as something to be navigated rather than fixed. And in that quiet shift lies the true resolution of the story. Not a dramatic transformation, but a gradual redefinition of what success looks like in a place where chaos isn't just inevitable, it's essential.